I've known you since I was a kid. Always thought you walked tall. Look like you done learn how to crawl.
Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to Buford Pusser, the other story. And I wanted to mention a news special that was done yesterday on WKRN out of Nashville. Very interesting story. I appreciated the fact that they hit both sides of the story because regardless of what everybody thinks, I'm not anti-Buford or anything like that. It's just that I enjoy the true story when it comes to any crime saga. And of course, the movie Walking Tall made Buford a national hero. And there was some good that came out of that, and I'm going to cover that here during this podcast. But their first segment was about questions remain about the death of Pauline. And they talked about the fact that there had been a tip that came in regarding Pauline's death and that she was exhumed. Now, in that podcast, they talked to another author, Oakley Dean Baldwin. And of course, he wrote a book about his distant cousin, Pauline Pusser, who was a big part of the Walking Tall saga because she was killed in that. Of course, I have always questioned the way that Pauline died. It didn't make sense to me that she died as Buford told authorities that day. Now, in his book, Dean uses a lot of the information that I'd come up with. I published my book, and because I was so interested in this, and I had a lot of encouragement from people on my Facebook page, Buford Pusser, the other story, to write a book about it, so I did. A couple of years later, Dean's book comes out, and it's basically about Pauline. And it has a lot of the information that I'd uncovered. He mentions red flags. Same thing that I've mentioned several times, the blood spatter on the card, trajectories. But there is so much more than what he covered. Now, Dean agreed with me that back in those days, law enforcement did a pretty shoddy job of the investigation. They missed a ton because when I went over there years ago and started interviewing people, I found a lot of people that the TBI back in those days or McNairy County officials should have interviewed, but apparently they weren't. The reason, I have no idea. But I do believe that there was an effort made to cover up Pauline's murder. One of the things that struck me years ago when I was checking into this was that Pauline had never had an autopsy. And that is one of those things that you really do, is get an autopsy on a murder victim. Here they did one on Louise Hathcock that Buford killed. She was a bar owner. And, of course, that autopsy revealed that he shot her in the back. The first two shots he fired were to the posterior side of her body, the third being to her head as she lay on the floor. So, you have to wonder, why was one not performed on Pauline? Was there something to hide, something that needed to come out? Now, in the second part of their story, they questioned why Pauline's remains were exhumed. Now, they did mention that in February of 2024, that Pauline was exhumed by authorities. They also had Dr. Feng Li, who is a medical examiner, quite good at what he does. And he was talking about the fact of what they look at in an autopsy. And, first of all, he said that a lot of things that come into play, the environment, the condition of the casket, the way that it is buried, so on. Now, if you look at the photos that they have, or the video that they have in this segment, you see that Pauline's casket was inside a concrete vault that was sealed. And so I expect that they probably had pretty good luck with the condition of her remains. It wouldn't surprise me if she was really intact. Now, as he pointed out, the first thing they do when they do unseal the vault and the casket is they take photos. They want to have a photographic documentation of the condition of her body. Then they want to do x-rays. And he explained what the x-rays were for. And then they have the body examined by a forensic anthropologist. And it's a pretty thorough route that they take in all this. And it's all to find what the actual cause of death was. Now, they indicated that there was a tip that came in. And of course, I think everybody knows, because years ago I had it posted on my podcast and on my Facebook page, Buford Pusser, The Other Story, that I had received a tip about a firearm that may have been used in the alleged ambush. And I say alleged because I don't believe everything happened like Buford said. It's important to note that I've had lots of people call in and tell me that they think that they might have the gun that was used to murder Pauline. And most of these tips go nowhere. But I always listen, because, you always wonder which one is going to be right. Well, one day I did get a call, and it was from an individual who had followed my page for several years. And he told me he thought he had the gun, and I was thinking, yeah, I've heard this story 50 times before. But his story checked a lot of boxes. So much so that I got in my car, drove over to McNairy County. I wanted to see the gun. I even shot it, recovered some of the brass, some of the projectiles that I keep. But I convinced him that we needed to contact the TBI, that they needed to be aware of the gun. And he agreed. Sure enough, we got a response from the TBI. They came out, picked up the gun, and they've had it in their possession since. Well, that led to Pauline being exhumed. The part that really struck me, again, I've mentioned this before, that no autopsy was performed in 1967. That has bothered me for years. Now, the next segment of the series was about the murder of Pauline Pusser. And in that, they interviewed Oakley Dean Baldwin again. Of course, Dean writes a lot of stories about his family. And of course, Pauline was a distant cousin. His book, The Murder of Pauline Pusser, is basically gives a lot of personal information about Pauline, how she grew up, going to Chicago, meeting Buford. Before that, having been married to Roman Vance and having 2 children by him, actually 3. One thing that I found unique about Dean's book was that he talks about another child that Pauline had and the circumstances that forced her to allow an adoption of this child, Karen. But his book is mostly a review of Pauline's personal life. Now, it's an interesting book. It's I think 135 pages. It's a 8x5 paper book available on Amazon. Now, in my book, Buford Pusser, The Other Story, it's a full-size 8.5 by 11. It's 254 pages. The difference between our books is while his talks about a family member, mine goes into a lot of the evidence. I have a lot of documents, a lot of photos. I've got a photo of Buford's actual wound. It's important to see because it tells a lot that the movie exaggerated. In the movie, they had his entire jaw blown away. He was wearing a cast. All that is bunk. Most of the wound was to his chin and lower lip. And, of course, they credit all these operations that were done, all these surgeries that were performed on Buford to be from the wound. Actually, most of them were to orbital eye socket that he injured in a separate accident. But for some reason, they want to include all those surgeries into being to repair his wound that he got on that August 12th, 67 alleged ambush. So there's a lot of things in here. It covers not only Buford, but it covers the Hathcock family, the state line, and clears up a lot of misinformation that people have. Moving on, we're going to talk about the following episode, which was about memorabilia. Now, in the next episode, they tell you about the tour of memorabilia of Sheriff Pusser's home. One thing I would encourage everyone to do if you happen to be in McNairy County is go to the museum. Lots of interesting things to see. You just have to keep in mind that they only tell part of the story. But I still would encourage you to go see what is there. It is interesting. One thing they will tell you is that Buford didn't really carry a stick. That was a single incident, but yet the movie, Walking Tall, decided to blow it into a weapon of choice for Buford, if you will. They also had Steve Sweat on this part of the program, and Steve is the honorary Pusser historian. You have to keep in mind that also Steve only tells part of the story, the part that he believes to be true. The difference between Steve and I is that while he collects a lot of Pusser items and likes to tell the story behind those, I get into the evidence of everything about Buford. So that's the big difference between an honorary historian and somebody who's looking for the truth. Because the truth really does matter. Another thing they'll sometimes tell you there at the museum is that Buford was actually killed in an accident. I know Walking Tall tried to make it appear that he was murdered. However, McNairy County officials, the state officials, even the FBI examined parts of the car. Helen Pusser herself had GM experts come and take a look at the vehicle, and every one of them said that there were no signs of sabotage. One thing that they will not mention, or haven't when I have been at the museum, is that Buford's blood alcohol concentration at the time of his accident was 0.18. And that's been verified by a former McNairy County deputy. Part 5 of the series was all about the influence that Buford has had on law enforcement. And of course, Guy Buck was there. He is the current sheriff of McNairy County. And he would talk about the influence that the movie Walking Tall and Buford had on law enforcement. It brought a lot of people into that career. Sheriff Buck also pointed out something that I've mentioned several times. Law enforcement has changed over the years. It's nothing like what it was back when I was the deputy sheriff. Things that we did back then, even though they weren't necessarily bad, just are considered improper behavior for a law enforcement officer today. And Guy pointed out that, if we did things now like they did back in the 60s, even the 80s, you'd probably go to jail for it. I see Buford Pusser and the movie Walking Tall kind of the same way that I view another movie, say Top Gun. You think about when that original movie came out, how many people were wanting to get into the Navy because of that movie? Well, Buford had the same, I think even more impactful influence on people wanting to get into law enforcement. They saw Walking Tall. They wanted to emulate him. They wanted to clean up crime in their counties, in their cities. So, he had a huge impact. I saw it myself when I was in law enforcement that a lot of people just really felt highly of Buford. But the point is, they didn't know the real story. I noticed that Sheriff Buck had to gracefully answer some questions. And when I say gracefully, I think that they would ask him a direct question and he would have to be careful. I assume that they were looking for him to be more positive about some things about Buford personally. He kind of evaded answering some of those questions, and I can't blame him. He's an elected official. He's got to ride the fence on certain things. And of course, in McNairy County, this would be one of them. In part 6, Buford's granddaughter, Madison, got to speak about Buford. And she says that he represented respect and integrity while he was in office. Well, we have to keep in mind that Madison wasn't born before Buford died. She never met her grandfather. What she knows are stories that have been passed down to her, and she wants to think the best of Buford. And I can't blame her. That's her granddad. I mean, that's what she should do, is think the best about him. However, she's an adult now. You can't turn a blind eye to the truth. So I'm sure that she's heard it. She doesn't want to believe it, but that's her prerogative. Of course, she pointed out that his methods of law enforcement, while they worked back then, they wouldn't work today. And that's so true. That's much like Guy Buck has told us. And she also said that he has a legacy of doing what is right. And to that, I would have to disagree. My research has shown that he didn't always do what was right. A lot of times, Buford did what was right for Buford. And that's the part that is so difficult for a lot of people to understand, a lot of people to swallow. While Madison no longer lives in McNairy County, she does return every year, and she does as her mother did, celebrates and passes along an award for the Outstanding Law Officer of the Year in the Buford Pusser Award. I think that's good for the community. It gives them something to celebrate in a town that is really small. But Buford did walk on both sides of the law, and I hope one of these days that Madison understands that. Now, part 7 of the series, Lawman Legend, deals with the fact that Adamsville has an annual festival for Buford Pusser. And I'm not opposed to that. I just wish that the city of Adamsville would recognize that Buford's is more of a Wyatt Earp type story rather than a Walking Tall story. He walked on both sides of the law. I don't know how often I can say that, but while he did a lot of good things for the community, he did a lot of bad. And a lot of people aren't aware of the bad things he did. Kids today don't really know much about Buford Pusser. And the generation before them that do know some of the things about Buford Pusser over the years have been intimidated into not speaking about some of the things that Buford did. It's a political hot potato. It's a family hot potato. I had one individual tell me that you didn't bring up Buford Pusser at a family function like a Thanksgiving dinner because half the people loved the man, half the people hated the man, and said that was a good way to get everybody mad and to go home early. So I just wish that the people behind all the festival would just be a little more honest about what Buford was really like. Other than that, I support the festival. I don't mind that they have it. I think it's a good time. It's a way for the community to come together. But the truth is what it is, and it has no agenda. And of course, the last segment is the one that Dennis Hathcock and I are on. And I would like to extend my appreciation to Mark Kelly of WKRN for doing this series. I think it's good that Mark tried to show both sides of the story. That is something that is rare because most people take one side or the other. At least WKRN has shown that they've got an open mind about this by showing both sides. Coming into this segment, they mentioned that there was controversy about Buford's history. And that's because Pauline's death is a cold case that has never been solved. Back then, I don't believe the investigators really looked at the evidence. And I also believe that they had a lot of political interference. In the early 1980s, the state legislature made the TBI, or Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, a separate entity from the Department of Public Safety. And that was due to a lot of political interference. And I believe a lot of it was due to U.S. Representative Ray Blanton, who was from Adamsville and was a friend of Buford's. It's odd that even though that they are in opposing political parties, with Buford being a Republican and Blanton having been a Democrat, Buford campaigned for him when he ran for governor, and he won. Of course, there's always been a lot of speculation that Blanton intended to make Buford the head of the Department of Public Safety before it was separated out, and that would have put Buford over the Highway Patrol, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And in view of Blanton's history of corruption himself, I think that says a great deal about where things were possibly headed. When people go on our tour, I think the thing that does the most to convince them about what I have to say is the fact that they took a route that is so convoluted, so out of the way, so much slower than just simply getting on Highway 64, 2 blocks from his home, driving into Selmer, getting on Highway 45 and going to the state line to Hollis Jordan's, where this alleged disturbance call was supposed to be. I think that people start to figure out why he took the route that he did, because it is so secluded. And when you see that route, people begin to wonder how on earth an ambush party would know to wait for him at that church. And then you've got the scenes, both ambush scenes. I don't think much of anything happened at the first scene. Buford said that that's where he first noticed the vehicle coming up behind him. One that is, they speculate came from beside the church, only 7/10 of a mile from the first ambush site. And they did it without the use of their headlights. But again, I don't think anything really happened at the first ambush site, even though Buford said 2 shots were fired and one hit Pauline in the head, but she was only wounded at that time. Said she was gasping for air. She leaned into him. He couldn't get to his sidearm because of her body weight over on him. So he just hit the gas and took off, hoping to outrun this party. But yet, he stopped 2.1 miles on down the road at the intersection of Davis Yancey and New Hope Roads. And he claimed that while he was stopped, the car pulled up, second time, stopped, shots were fired. Buford claimed he was hit by one of the first rounds that had sent him to the floorboard. Now, I don't understand how a man his size with a woman leaning against him can go to the floorboard like that. But that was his claim. Said he was unconscious for a while, and when he came to and raised himself back up, he could see that Pauline had been shot a second time and was dead. Then he says he looked to the left, and the ambush party was still sitting there. And he reached out and grabbed the carbine by the barrel and held on to it until they drove away. And then he went to the state line And instead of turning left and going into Corinth if he was concerned about his own health or that of Pauline's possibly still being alive, he turned north and went to Selmer. Was he trying to avoid crossing a state line and the FBI becoming involved? I don't know. I just know the circumstances there surrounding Pauline's death has been an interesting, very interesting cold case. Now, this segment also had their honorary Buford Pusser historian. And if you notice, Steve Sweat never mentions any evidence. What he is going on is by what Buford said. And if Buford said it, as far as Steve is concerned, that's the way it was. Now, a lot of times you will find that Steve will criticize anyone that is not there in the local area that speaks out about this. And what's concerning about that is that while Steve Sweat is just repeating things that Buford said, he never looks at evidence. He never produces any evidence. He just criticizes those of us who look for that. And according to Steve, if you're not from there, you don't know. Well, Steve was born in August of 1955. That means that he was approximately 9 years old when Buford was elected sheriff, 1964. So, that being the case, you have to wonder, with Steve saying that you don't know unless you were from there, how much would a 9-year-old be exposed to? Did he and Buford double date? Did he go on raids with Buford at the age of 9? I don't think so. So I don't know how Steve would know any more than anybody else, especially if he refuses to look at evidence like blood spatter on the car, like trajectories, time and motion, witnesses that were never questioned. There is so much out there that he ignores. But that's his prerogative. Me, I prefer the evidence. Why? Because the evidence is something that they use in a court of law, not what a movie like Walking Tall said. So there you have it, folks. I would like to suggest that if you want to keep seeing these episodes, please give the channel a like, and please make your comments. I'm always interested in what people have to say and what their thought process is. All I ask is that people be respectful whenever they make a post, because opinions are going to vary. And so please be polite. So until next time, just remember, as I always say, truth has no agenda. And thanks for watching.